Around 1200 BC, the most advanced civilizations on Earth began to disappear almost at the same time. Cities that had stood for centuries were abandoned, trade routes failed, and writing systems vanished. There was no single invasion, no decisive battle, no clear moment when collapse was declared. Instead, a connected system failed, quietly, unevenly, and faster than anyone else could repair it. By the time the leaders understood what was happening, there was no mechanism left to stop it. This is the collapse that ended the Bronze Age. For hundreds of years before the collapse, the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East were bound together by an interconnected network of trade, diplomacy, and shared dependence. Tin from Central Asia, copper from Cyprus, timber from Lebanon, and luxury goods from the Aegean moved along established routes that linked Mycenaean Greece, the Hittite Empire, Babylon, and dozens of smaller states. No single power controlled this system. Everyone relied on it. Bronze Age civilization was built on complexity. Armies depended on imported metals. Cities depended on long-distance food shipments. Kings depended on tribute and alliance networks that extended far beyond their borders. The system worked as long as everything worked at once. By the late 13th century BC, strain was already visible. Letters preserved on clay tablets describe shortages of grain, delayed shipments, and appeals for aid. Archaeological evidence shows destruction layers appearing across multiple regions with a short span of time. Earthquakes damaged major urban centres. Droughts reduced agricultural output. Internal unrest weakened political authority. None of these pressures were unprecedented on their own. What made this period different is that they began occurring all at the same time. The trade system that sustained Bronze Age power was efficient but fragile. Tin, essential for producing bronze, came from distant and limited sources. When shipments were delayed or lost, weapons production slowed. When weapons were scarce, armies weakened. And when armies weakened, borders became difficult to defend. And when them borders failed, trade routes became unsafe or unusable. Written records from the period shows rulers requesting assistance that never arrived. One Hittite letter asks for grain shipments to prevent starvation. Another warns enemy forces are approaching coastal cities that can no longer defend themselves. Egyptian inscriptions describe attacks by groups, later labelled as the Sea Peoples, though their exact identity remains debated. What is clear is that the existing defensive systems were overwhelmed. As pressure mounted, the interconnected nature of the system accelerated the collapse. When one region failed, its trading partners lost access to supplies. Those partners weakened. They could no longer support others. Political authority eroded as kings lost their ability to protect populations or enforce order. Cities were abandoned not only because they were attacked, but because sustaining them had become impossible. This pattern repeated across the region. Central authority collapsed. Trade stopped. Writing disappeared. Specialized labor vanished. Large urban centers gave way to more localized communities focused on survival rather than administration. In Greece, literacy disappeared for centuries. The Hittite Empire ceased to exist. Powerful cities were left in ruins. Not every society disappeared entirely. Some regions endured collapse better than others, and the difference was structural rather than cultural. Communities that relied less on long-distance trade, centralized administration, or imported materials were more resilient. Smaller settlements with localized food production and simpler political organization adapted more effectively once large systems had failed. Egypt, for example, did not collapse in the same way the Mycenaean Greece or the Hittite Empire. It experienced population loss, internal instability, and external pressure. But its geographic isolation, control over agricultural production along the Nile, and reduced dependence on external trade allowed continuity at a diminished scale. Authority weakened, but it did not vanish completely. In contrast, highly specialized states collapsed fastest. Societies dependent on imported metals for weapons, foreign grain for food security, or distant allies for defense had no fallback when those connections failed. When trade routes broke, the communication stopped. There was no replacement system ready to take their place. The collapse did not reward strength or size, it rewarded simplicity, proximity, and self-sufficiency. There was no single cause, no decisive battle, no single decision that ended the Bronze Age. The system had failed because it had grown too complex to adapt once multiple pressures converged. Each decision made to preserve order reduced flexibility. Every attempt to stabilize the system narrowed the options available. By the time leaders understood the scale of the failure, recovery was no longer possible. The networks that sustained the Bronze Age civilization required coordination across regions that could no longer communicate, supply, or defend themselves. Collapse became mechanical rather than dramatic. It was no longer a question of stopping it, but of enduring it. The Bronze Age did not end because people forgot how to build cities or fight wars. It ended because the structures that supported complexity collapsed faster than they could be repaired. What followed was not immediate renewal, but centuries of reduced population, localized economies, and simpler political organization. The world eventually recovered. Iron replaced bronze, new states emerged, trade returned in different forms, but the system that had once connected the ancient world was gone. The Bronze Age ended not with a single disaster, but with the moment that complexity turned against civilization itself. If this video brought you back to the Bronze Age, then please let me know in the comments.